How about Captain Crunch's Crunch Berries with breakfast?
Whoa, Dad, we're on
Crunch Island. He's Charlotte Foot.
And he stole our crunch.
Quick, the zip line.
He's getting away.
Throw our last crunch berry.
No!
No one steals my crunch berries.
I think you mean my crunch berries. Choose your own crunch venture with Cap'n Crunch.
Start your summer road trip at Midas and get up to $30 off your next repair service. Plus, get a free closer look vehicle check to make sure you're road trip ready. If you need brake service, an alignment check, or tune-up, hit up Midas for up to $30 off. For more details, request your appointment at Midas.com.
Welcome to Education in Focus. I'm your host, Eliana Kernodle. 3 lawsuits challenging the Biden administration's changes to Title IX have seen preliminary success. While the cases are still in progress, judges so far have ruled in favor of the states opposing the changes. Joining me to discuss this is Chalkboard News editor Brendan Clary. Brendan, tell us about these lawsuits, which states are involved, and what were their arguments?
Yeah, no, this is it's a very, very big development. We've been covering the Title IX rules from the Department of Education. They basically rewrote gender identity into federal sex discrimination law. So basically, instead of saying schools can't discriminate on the basis of sex, they've also added gender identity into that. And so now, a number of states after that became an official rule and was handed down with an effective date of August 1st. States have filed lawsuits and are challenging that. So the most recent one was from a court in Kentucky, and that was governing Tennessee, Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana, Virginia, and West Virginia, those 6 states. Previously, last week, there was an injunction in Texas and then also in Louisiana governing a number of states as well. So the Louisiana one, I think, covered 6 states, and the one today covered 6 states, and there's a number of other cases that cover some states. There's a lot of moving pieces with these, with all the different kinds of cases and then the different kinds of arguments. But that's in a nutshell, that's what we've seen in terms of some of the successes, as you mentioned, of, these courts are saying, hey, you're likely to succeed on the merits of your argument.
Yeah, can you get into the rulings a bit? I know the Texas one is a bit of an outlier, but on the other 2 cases, kind of what were the arguments there and what were the rulings judges handed down?
Yeah, so on Monday, June 17th, a Kentucky court ruled that the Biden administration's rule will derail a deeply rooted law and that the arguments based on a Supreme Court decision, Bostock, do not apply more broadly, and basically that the states that are bringing the lawsuit will suffer immediate and irreparable harm, and that essentially the new rule contravenes the plain text of Title IX by redefining sex to include gender identity, and it violates government employees' First Amendment rights, and it's the result of arbitrary and capricious rulemaking. And essentially that is agreeing with the state's arguments that it violates the Administrative Procedural Act. So that's sort of the arbitrary and capricious rulemaking there. Basically, that the government made these rules without standing and without the authority to do so, and that was able to be challenged under the APA. Again, we're starting to get sort of into the technical arguments here, but we're dissecting these legal documents that it violates government's employees' First Amendment rights. Essentially, it would compel teachers to use pronouns for students, and maybe in cases where it isn't even related to gender, or it could be students who are gender fluid would say you need to call me by these different pronouns on these different days, and basically that this would mandate teachers to use those or be in violation of federal law, essentially, and redefining sex to include gender identity. So sort of taking the Title IX. So I think there's, as you mentioned, there's a little bit of an outlier in Texas, but the Louisiana injunction, the ruling, and also the Kentucky ruling, they're both pretty similar in terms of, challenging the Biden administration rules based on the Administrative Procedures Act, the APA, and also some of these free speech concerns with the First Amendment. There's also in the Louisiana ones, it's kind of interesting that they say that it violates the spending clause and the free exercise clause of the First Amendment. So just these different kinds of invocations of the Constitution and some of these government statutes.
Yeah, so let's get into the Texas one since it is a little bit different. What are the differences in that case?
Yeah, so that one seems to be focused, like when you get into the lawsuit there, it seems to be focused on the guidance documents that are behind the Title IX ruling. And essentially, it takes issue, from what I can tell, it takes issue with the new rules basis on these guidance documents, which were challenged in court before the new rule came out. So essentially, under President Barack Obama, the Department of Education released a Dear Colleague letter, and it also had some other policies about, about transgender students, and essentially said that, you need to do this based on our interpretation of this. And then the court said, and specifically even the court in Texas said, that these documents violate the law because the plain meaning of the term sex in the law, when it was enacted by the Department of Education, following the passage of Title IX, meant the biological and anatomical differences between male and female students as determined at their birth. So like the courts have already ruled on this and said that these guidance documents are contrary to law. And then another argument from the state of Texas is that they were promulgated without notice and comment rulemaking. So essentially the Department of Education was relying on these guidance documents, and they didn't do the rulemaking process with these guidance documents, which they were relying on. And so the Department of Education disagreed and said that these guidance documents correctly interpreted Title IX's prohibition on sex discrimination, and as, quote, interpretive rules were not required to undergo notice and comment rulemaking like they did with the federal notice of proposed rulemaking for this final rule. But basically, the court found that the guidance documents constitute a substantive legislative rule that is contrary to law and in excess of the department's authority. So essentially, these documents in themselves kind of have the force of law, and they were referring to them sort of as like interpretive rules, but they were like basically lawmaking, but they failed to undergo that required notice and comment rulemaking prior to promulgation. So it's kind of gets, again, really into the weeds here, but there's like some of these differences in terms of what we're talking about and what the courts are talking about and what the legal challenges to it are.
So these lawsuits, the legal process isn't over yet. What are the next steps in these cases?
Yeah, so these are not over yet. As you mentioned, these are preliminary injunctions. So that means that August 1st is getting closer and closer. And so instead of having schools spending, school boards too, schools spend all summer trying to come up with policies and hire Title IX coordinators and try to comply with the law, which is, I believe the Louisiana injunction says, it's going to be expensive to do this, that there is a lot of money that it will take, a lot of compliance costs associated with this. So instead of doing that, these courts are basically saying, hold on, wait a second, we're going to decide. And that there is actually a lot of merit to what the states are saying, what these plaintiffs are saying in these cases. So it's not a guarantee. It's not like these are final rulings, but they do indicate that, yes, as this is going on, it's kind of a preliminary understanding of maybe how the cases are going to go. So we can't say exactly what the cases will end up saying, or if, this is going to be struck down, but it doesn't look good for the Biden administration who's trying to push this through.
Well, Brendan, thank you for your insights on this story. I'm sure we will continue to follow its developments, and listeners can keep up with those developments at chalkboardnews.com.
Start your summer road trip at Midas and get up to $30 off your next repair service. Plus, get a free closer look vehicle check to make sure you're road trip ready. If you need brake service, an alignment check, or tune-up, hit up Midas for up to $30 off. For more details, request your appointment at Midas.com.